It's election day. Have you voted yet? Good evening. Welcome to my State of Mind. I am Dan York. You know, it's funny. Sometimes I forget what day it is. I mean, not generally when I wake up in the morning, I know what day it is, but by the time the day has gone by and our production schedules here for the show, sometimes I'm not sure. So you are getting ready for, I'm sure, live coverage on Channel 12 and beyond here for this very, very wild and willy election day on an election season that has been incredible. We are actually recording the show last night, Monday. Last night, you got a chance to see the Constitutional Convention debate, and I hope you were an informed voter in the booth today. Now, it's 7:30 for those of you watching the early show, and the polls have not closed yet. They're open for another half hour. And so this will be instructive for you, this show, as we kind of go down all these races that we've been following so closely with Dan McGowan from DohertyPRI.com. For those of you who are seeing this at 11:30, it's going to seem weird because you already know all the results. But you'll be able to say, let's see what those two idiots knew about this race. Maybe they were right, maybe they were wrong, because you'll already know who's in, who's out, unless we have a situation where Providence is upside down, and you never know, it might be. So as we go to the rundown, which is our customary habit, that's it. We're just going to talk about the state offices here in our first segment. We'll have a good conversation about the Providence mayoral race, because Danny's really done a great job on that race, and then we'll touch on the federal offices for about 18 seconds, because that's about all they deserve, because there's no race.
There's no real races there.
Welcome again, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. So, yeah. Overall, before we talk about anything, what is your election day thought?
Thank God it's over.
Really?
It has been a long...
Why would you say that?
It's been a long, long time. I mean, if you think about it, Angel Tavares and Gina Raimondo especially, we've been talking about her running for governor since...
Well, will she? When is she going to announce?
Right.
And then she announced, and then, yeah, you're right.
So it's just been a long, long time, coming. And now that we're here, we've been inundated with the advertisements and all that stuff. It'll be nice to take a step back and look at the results and kind of, take a nap.
Well, the economy of the election is kind of interesting, isn't it? Listen, let's not kid ourselves. Broadcast facilities like the one that owns this show and owns your salary and whatever else owns you have done very, very well.
Sure.
In this, I heard some numbers, and maybe we'll have some. Well, they're public numbers, but I mean there was more than 7 figures dumped just recently in this place alone.
Yeah.
Think about that. I mean that's.
Well,
I get a little guilty qualm sometimes about the amount of money that broadcast facilities actually earn from elections. But that's a whole long conversation, isn't it?
Sure. But it's good. It pays my salary. I'm more than happy to accept anybody's money that wants to give it our way.
All right.
I'm sure you are too. Come on.
Well, no, but I think it is it's a very interesting conversation, because it really is very much about the haves and have-nots, and then we judge the quality of somebody's candidacy via the kind of money that they have. The Republicans,
it's the first thing we do.
Yeah, the Republicans on the federal side certainly are always burdened by that, and in fact, I kind of think that some of the statewide races have been touched by that. So, speaking of, why don't we dig in? The governor's race is what most people would think is the most important. I would digress and say the attorney general's race is more important even than the governor's race, but that's an argument within an argument. We've got the polling data from the governor's race early on. To remind you, it was 6 points for Gina Raimondo on the WPRI Projo poll, and that number came in, in September, and then late September, and then we got this number where the polling data ended up being 11 points, and everyone said, "What? Really? Huh? Healy robbing from Fung," and now we see that really isn't the case. And then what else do we have? Do we have any other polling data? Yeah, and then was the second one. I'm sorry. Then the poll previous was Brown, and this is Brown's second dip into it. A week later, they come out with a dead heat, which left Brown in a funny place, didn't it?
Absolutely, it did. I mean, you go to go a 10-point swing or 11-point swing in a week when nothing happened in that week was very, very strange, for sure.
What do you think the numbers meant prior and then latter?
Prior, I think it was it just showed you that Brown heavily weighed Providence voters, and those are heavily Democrat. It's a heavily Democratic city, so I think you got to throw out that first poll. The second poll, I was surprised that it was neck and neck, but when you look at it, I mean, Alan Fung has benefited greatly from the public funds, right? He started, really. Had what did he get? Almost $1 million to start the general election, while Gina Raimondo spent $4 or $5 million in the primary, was really at a disadvantage. Kudos to Alan Fung. He's run a strong campaign with the money that he had after running what I think a lot of people thought was a weak primary campaign.
Yeah, it was kind of a crapshoot financially. You raise enough money to squeak by a primary, and then in a matching fund formula, you get a whole boatload that's sitting on your desk to start with. Right. She exhausted 85-90% of her dough to get through a primary. Right. Clay Pell.
And some would say for her, maybe she should have held back a little bit of money instead of kind of running up the score in the primary. If she had $500,000 or $1 million to keep for the general election, we might not even be talking about this being such a close race.
I'm told that all is not Shangri-La in the Raimondo camp. You're hearing the same things?
I think you always hear this as you look at someone like Gina Raimondo, who's been whether she's been the favorite the entire time. We've been talking about her as a potential candidate for governor for years and years and years. And, I think now as we see a poll, a neck-and-neck poll, you start to hear people say, well, somebody's screwing up there, somebody did that. Of course she had the gaffe with the Planned Parenthood situation. So lots of fingers get pointed.
Inside.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
I don't think that, people get the misimpression that, a team is in a political dugout and they're all feeling good about each other. It can be one brutal organization, right. A campaign there. I think Alan Fung is right there. Chris Christie coming back a third time. The Republican Governors Association obviously feels that their polling data shows that this thing is winnable. Yeah. You wouldn't be surprised if he won it, would you?
I wouldn't be surprised at all. And you're seeing it across New England. You're seeing in Connecticut there's a close race. In Massachusetts we've got a close race. Up north there's some close Republican. So there's a chance for a Republican wave for at least for gubernatorial candidates in New England.
She had a hard time. She had a hard challenge. I used to say at the beginning of her race that she had this much, chips stacked. The question is, could she hold on to the stack to have one more chip than Alan Fung and/or Bob Healy, who we haven't talked about. Her misstep by just her tone with the diocese off the Planned Parenthood episode, if she loses, might be it.
Sure, I think that'll be it, and I think also, one of the things that's always been fascinating about Gina Raimondo is she's been able to control her message so well over the course of the last several years, right? She was very, very guarded when it came to pension reform in 2011. When you're the state treasurer, you don't have to answer a lot of questions in between that time. So you get to this, you get to the gubernatorial race and you think, oh, maybe she'd have a lot more pressure on her in that primary, but she kind of got through without having to answer a lot of tough questions, without having a microphone kind of jammed in her face. Then we get to the general election and she has right off the bat kind of the Planned Parenthood situation, and she's been on her heels ever since.
All right, real quick, let's just swing down the other races that we've got here. The Attorney General's race, for me, has always been so important, and I'm upset that the major television stations didn't have a primetime debate for Attorney General, including our own company. Everyone knows how I feel about that. You know what? So what? But it's too important a position. And Hodgson is a very viable candidate.
Sure.
My guess is we can say this at 7:30. He's going to fall short. That's my guess. Is that what your guess is?
I would guess so. I think he didn't raise enough money to run as competitive a race as he'd have liked to. But you're absolutely right. He was a good candidate. I would not be totally shocked if he did pull it off. And I wouldn't be shocked if we see him a couple of years from now jumping back in the ring, because he is a strong candidate. He just never got there financially.
And, I think we didn't pay a lot of attention. Peter Martin has been a very stealth AG anyway. He's not out there out front. He comes to, hey, by the way, it's me, 3 months in front of a race. He never recused himself from 38 Studios, which is a complete confusion to me. But the Democratic, and I'll tell you, this will be the last year, right, for a master lever, which I'm sure will help him by a little bit.
My guess is it will help him, and I think it's also, Dawson Hodgson, unfortunately, we got bogged down by a crazy Providence mayor's race and by a very competitive governor's race. I think people kind of got exhausted and never really got to the issues. You didn't see a lot of coverage, whether it was paid media or just the news media covering this race.
And then the other down ticket races, the treasurer's race is is an important one too. It's a bean counting race, but Gina Raimondo's presence made it profound. Ernie Almonte, my guess, is also going to fall short to some Democratic groupthink behavior.
Yeah, I mean, Ernie Almonte, you've had him on a couple of times, and I've listened to him on your radio show too. Everyone you meet, the two things they say about Ernie Almonte: very smart guy and one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. I don't know that he quite got that across, with his paid media campaign. And again, it was another situation where nobody really covered the treasurer's race.
Taylor McKee on the lieutenant governor's side. I think my guess is that he might hold on.
Yeah.
But he'll be holding on.
I think he'll be holding on. He was the guy that he was always sort of the outcast of all the Democratic candidates, simply because the unions don't like him over his education reform positions. A lot of unions jump behind Catherine Taylor. The problem with Catherine Taylor is she never quite got out there. They debated on Newsmakers just last week, and Dan McKee held his own. There was nothing that made waves or changed headlines.
But she spent a lot of dough on my other employer, WPROAM, and McKee has been respecting the boycott. So who knows? You know what? Why don't we leave it there on the statewide races? We'll come back and we'll. Where am I going? Boom, boom, boom. Follow the red light, Dan. When we come back, we got to spend some time on this mayor's race. It's important. Stay with us. So I don't know. Some pundits and journalists might feel a sense of loss tomorrow. Well, by Thursday, when we stop talking about the mayor's race in Providence. Will you? You've done a very good job in this race, by the way.
I really appreciate
Covering
it.
it.
Yeah, and this is another one that we've been looking and thinking about who was going to run for this office and asking Buddy Cianci, are you going to run, for years now. We're talking since 2012. I remember talking to Buddy Cianci, asking him, are you going to do it? Are you going to pull the trigger? So it is definitely, there will be some sort of relief, but then I'll feel like I've lost something.
It's funny because I haven't thought back that long. The truth is, he denied. He laughed, he scoffed at the whole thing.
Never say never was his big.
Yeah, but that would only come out one out of every 3 times. I've run for. He was planning on running the entire time. He was running when he was in jail, as far as I'm concerned. But he's had the biggest test that I've ever seen a politician have, and that is to have most of the mover shaker and media world against you from day one.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. It has been a really remarkable, if you take it all together, think about the sort of relentless effort that went into defeating Buddy Cianci. And I'm not saying that that's going to happen. We have no idea. But, when you take the President of the United States endorsing a mayoral candidate in the 134th largest city in the country, that doesn't happen. The U.S. Attorney's press conference, all the congressional delegation getting behind him. We've talked many times about the Providence Journal's editorial board. This was an incredible effort. You've been around longer than I have. I've never seen anything like it.
Never. Well, I've never seen anything like Buddy Cianci, and that's part of the magic and the myth and the enigma of the entire thing. But the polling data, if you'll remember, Channel 12 and the Projo started this whole mess when they decided to say, guess what, Buddy was up 6. And I believe that poll at that time was as accurate as any poll you're going to get. I mean, Joe Fleming does a wonderful job. And all of a sudden, the conversation got turned upside down when, in October, we got this poll from Brown University. And that really changed the election conversation. I'll tell you, Brown's got a lot of influence in the late part of the conversation. What do you think?
I thought the most interesting thing about the Brown poll was that he hadn't moved from our poll, that Buddy hadn't moved from our poll from 38 to 38. The 48, I've always said I was surprised by Jorge being that far ahead. I wasn't surprised necessarily by Jorge being ahead because of that effort that went into really attacking Buddy. It wasn't necessarily, we're not going to look back at this and say Jorge Elorza went out there and won this race if he does go on and win. We're going to say Jorge Elorza benefited greatly from the negative Cianci campaign.
Well, it's so interesting because he said today being Monday then, so yesterday, to a reporter scrum, he said, we've kept the message positive. who stayed on message. I'm thinking, come on, man. The primary was won over the fear of Buddy Cianci winning. He will win. Yeah, he had some positions, and there were some things he said that were informative and a little bit of vision. But the truth is, this has been a litmus test on Cianci from the get-go, and the third-party advertising that no candidate has any relationship to has been brutal.
Right.
Brutal.
Yes, and it's in. You saw. You're right. The last-minute advertising, particularly from Murphy York's super PAC, and then from Buddy's super PAC as well. A back and forth was where the pro Buddy super PAC, was certainly it was brutal. That's the best way to put it. Jorge Elorza was interesting. He's another one that was thinking about running for office for a long time, and when he got into the race, when he wasn't getting any traction, he had really interesting thoughts. He was on your show a couple of times. Very interesting guy. That went away in the after the primary. We did not talk issues really at all, if you think about it. I mean, you and I were at a couple press conferences. Generally, we were asking, why are we here? And so, whoever was advising him said, let's make this a litmus test on Buddy Cianci. If it's successful, then it'll have been a great campaign. But if Buddy wins this race, it's going to be because Buddy did talk about issues, and Buddy tried to make this a I care about the future of Providence conversation.
And he started, although at the beginning he said, I just want to talk about the future, he started talking about the past a whole lot more than he wanted to, trying to remind people of what he had done in the past. And then, even referring to the city in his radio ads as she, like I couldn't leave her. At the same time, you can't stop being Buddy Cianci. He's got a couple of cops working off duty at Crossroads. All he has to do is say, yeah, those guys got to calm down. Instead, I don't know who they are. Right. Leaving that impression still that he's still got a little bit of that deny thing inside him that he can't shake, which gives the voters a little bit of a qualm, I think.
Well, no question about it. And the coverage of that and lots of other things, everything Buddy did, people had a raised eyebrow over, right? He attacks Jorge Elorza over this municipal income tax. That's a typical back and forth battle that Michael Solomon and Brett Smiley both used against Jorge. But when Buddy did it, it was, Buddy's lying for votes. That was the headline of the Providence Journal editorial. So,
you've had a pretty objective perspective on that. Objective to show the subjectivity levels. So he not only does he carry the baggage of what he did do, he carries the baggage of the mythology of who he is. I just don't know whether the voters will respond with an aggressive reaction to that. In other words, you know what? Stop it. I wonder if there's a stop it factor out there. I don't know.
Well,
we're going to know in about a half an hour.
That's exactly right. Well, everything's going to come down to turnout. So, if we're talking about a low turnout, if we're talking in the under 34,000 range, some people are projecting maybe even under 30,000, although I doubt that. It's going to be very hard to overcome an East Side surge.
How could it be under 30,000?
I can't see it, but
how's that possible?
Smart people who know the city of Providence say they think that there is a real apathetic voter base right now, and they don't think people are going to turn out. They think it's in the low 30,000s and potentially under 30,000.
Well, if we see by some precinct reporting that the East Side is more than 4,000 apart, it's over.
It's going to be insurmountable, yeah.
He doesn't agree with me. I talked to him on Friday about that. He said, no, my South Side support is so strong, and you've written about the South Side, we'll talk about that, but my South Side support is so strong I can overcome that. I don't think so.
No, if he comes off the East Side down 4,000 votes, nothing against Buddy Cianci, but it's just incredibly difficult. And those places where he's supposed to do well, that north end of the city, there's a lot of signs there, and there's a lot of support there. I have no doubt he'll win in those areas. But we're talking needing to make up 4,000 votes. That is incredibly difficult.
But he's doing very well on the south end.
That's right.
And Jorge Elorza was there yesterday trying to recover there.
Sure.
Thought about it real quick?
Yeah, I mean, Jorge's always had a problem on the south side. Michael Solomon did a better job and was in early with the south side. He won the south side against Elorza in the primary. I think Buddy does have strong African-American support. That's where the African-Americans live, generally speaking. And so, I think it could be close. Do I think Buddy Cianci's going to win decisively over there? I would doubt it. I think it's going to be close. I could see Buddy winning over there, though.
But the East Side might be the whole shooting match.
It might be the whole one.
All right. We have some federal offices, too, Stay with us. By the way, Dan and I did not talk about the mail ballot part of the Providence election real quick. I mean, if there's going to be a hanging Chad controversy, that's where it will be, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that, if there's going to be anywhere where we end up in court over this, it will be over mail ballots. I mean, my guess tells me that Buddy Cianci did a pretty good job with mail ballots, and that he'll come off of mail ballots up a pretty significant amount. The question is going to be, was there anything to that Crossroads situation, the Fox Point situation?
Any thought on while the rest of the country is battling for control in Washington, where so many Senate races are hanging in the balance, where there's so much fighting over power in the House, that we sit here kind of just twiddling our thumbs watching our Democratic delegation get elected by 15, 20, 30, 40 points in every race?
Well, it's interesting that you compare it to 2012, where Barry Hinckley came along and slowly but surely raised money and got beat up on, but ran a competitive race. When we look at now, and then Brandon Doherty, of course, against David Cicilline. Even Mike Riley ran a relatively competitive race, spent $1 million against Jim Langevin. Now we're looking at it 2 years later, and we're not looking at very serious candidates at all, at least financially and all the things, in terms of having, volunteers and all that. We're not seeing the same campaign 2 years later.
So really, your sentiment, like you said at the top of the show, is you're glad it's over? See, the thing when people say to me, well, Dan, what are you going to do after, I bet you can't wait for the election to be over. I got to show up anyway.
Well, it's true.
This show's not going anywhere, I hope, knock wood.
I'm going to
radio
need news.
show's right.
That's true.
You know what? You got.
I'll be in City Hall no matter what on Wednesday, probably. So.
All right. Thanks for your help. Good reporting on this mayor's race. It's been fascinating. Final thought when we come back. So tomorrow night, Ted Nesi will join us, and we'll tell you how smart we were when we see what you decided to do at the polls, as I think about one more thing. I would make my speech about how you have to be informed when you go to the polls, but it's already 8 o'clock, and I just want to say I hope you were smart when you went to the polls, and you did some homework and didn't do any mindless group think or make a last-minute decision. But you know what? We'll let the chips fall where they may. Coverage all evening long on Channel 12 and WPR Radio. You should pay attention to both. I'll be talking to you tomorrow at noon on the radio to hammer it all out, and back here tomorrow night at 7:30 on My State of Mind.